ladies and gentlemen, let's look again at Russia. Where we left off, Boris Yeltsin had stepped aside. He was sick and also an alcoholic. He picks a mayor of St. Petersburg at the time, kind of a law and order hardcore guy named Vladimir Putin to be his essentially his deputy, his prime minister in 1999. Now, why did he pick Vladimir Putin? Well, a lot of it is image, okay? But he ends up being the only two presidents of the Russian Federation going forward, and three in total. Of course, Boris Yeltsin was one, Putin was two, and Putin's deputy at the time, Dmitry Medvedev. If you notice, from 2000 to 2008, Vladimir Putin was president. Then hit the Constitution at the time. It said that the Russian president could only run for two terms. He interpreted it to mean doesn't mean he couldn't do it again later. And so he flipped positions with his deputy between 2008 and 2012, and then came back into power in 2012. Got the Constitution rewritten so he could run kind of in perpetuity. So the only three presidents of the Russian Federation have been Boris Yeltsin, Vladimir Putin, and Dmitry Medvedev. Putin, of course, is currently still president of Russia. Part of that is due to something known as cult of personality. Cult of personality is using mass media, massive amounts of propaganda to promote the image of the head of the country as being heroic or ideal. Basically, it's hero worship, the worship of a person, no longer the state. Okay, for instance, Hitler. It wasn't that just that Germany was, a country. It was that Hitler was Germany, that the Nazis were Germany. That represented everything about being German. Kim Jong Il, Kim Il Sung, Kim Jong Un, this whole family became what it was to be North Korean, just like in Russia. In Russia, what it meant to be Russian was Vladimir Putin. The state didn't even matter nearly as much as the person. So when you find a country like Iran, like China now, like definitely Russia, where these people, whether it's a supreme leader, a president, they become what it represents, embodies the spirit of that country, not the laws, not the culture, not the norms of society, but the person becomes the representation of the country. That's the formation of a cult of personality. And you develop that cult by propaganda, whether it's music videos and songs that are released on the radio that become super popular. I want a man like Putin. Whether you throw in, here in the United States, you could order Putin calendars of him doing fun little things with animals and being really cute. But in Russia, of course, what they really like is the idea of the strong man, the strict father figure. And so in Russia, you started to get this huge, campaign of photographs and um, TV shows and video collections about Putin doing judo, because Putin was a member of the KGB, which is the Soviet spy service. So he really honestly could kill people. But he was doing judo and he was doing target shooting, and he was out there overlooking bear encampments and swimming in icy cold water, and you could find tons of different pictures of him bare chested on horses or shooting rifles or throwing knives and this kind of thing. Again, promoting that huge image of look at, I'm a man, I am a man's man, and I deserve to be running this country because look at me, I'm a strong man. Now, that was not going to be enough. He actually needed to take action that's made him look like a strong man. And this brings us to that region where you see the red over there. That red is actually Chechnya, but that whole region down there between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, that is known as the Caucasus region of Russia. Okay, this is the one part of Russia where people don't see themselves nearly as Russians. They see themselves as different little nations. Places like Dagestan and Chechnya and North Ossetia, Abkhazia. These are regions that don't really see themselves as a part of Greater Russia. They see themselves more of their own ethnic heritage. These areas are much more Muslim. They are much less connected to the Eastern Orthodox Russian Church. So, what they have been doing since the fall of the Soviet Union is attempting to pull away. In the 1990s, Chechnya actually became a very violent place, and Boris Yeltsin attempted to put it down. And it kind of became a thorn in the side of the Russian government. So, In 1999, when Vladimir Putin comes to power, there is a series outside of Moscow, there's a series of apartment bombings by car bombs. And immediately, Vladimir Putin latches onto this and says, "Oh, okay, I've had it. We're taking care of Chechnya now. I can't even have this happening." You could really make it kind of similar to um, the whole when Hamas on October 7th, 2024, invaded Israel and killed a few thousand people. That was kind of that. And then Benjamin Netanyahu's like, no, we're taking care of business. That was kind of like what Vladimir Putin did. At the time, he wasn't seen as like this heavy dictator, though. I mean, he was put into power legitimately. So what they found out later, however, is that those bombs had been planted, in fact, by the Federal Security Service. That's the FSB. So it was actually an operation that was planted and that killed many Russians. And it was never like brought out there to public, but it eventually was found out that it was a false flag operation to kind of push and get support for war in Chechnya. And Vladimir Putin took a hold of that, and that's the capital of Chechnya, Grozny, in 1999. He basically flattened that city to the ground, killed 10,000 people, really was super, super, super brutal, and pretty much suppressed a majority of super violent um, Chechnyan action. There wasn't really much of an uprising there at the time. Okay. Now, there were other actions, and what had started to happen is after Grozny, attacks by Chechens in Russia legitimately did increase, and Vladimir Putin would use them as an excuse to get rid of civil liberties and to like contain his own power. So there was a theater hostage crisis in 2002. Chechens go into the theater, take a bunch of people hostage, and what happens? Well, after a few days, Vladimir Putin orders the entire theater gassed, and everybody, hostages and the terrorists, all die. But he doesn't allow the media really access on, like, was it something did somebody make a mistake, or did they intentionally just say, the heck with it, we're killing everybody in that theater because we're taking care of business, we're going to be strong on terrorism. Nobody really knew what happened after that, but it was kind of implied that Putin just didn't care. He was going to kill everybody in that theater to show how strong he was, and actually started to put much greater restrictions on the media. You could not discuss anti-terror activities at all, and you could not report on anything happening with Chechnya. Um, this is where you started to see reporters accidentally get killed by police or take nosedives out of their third or fourth floor apartment. Those reporters might be nosing in on Chechnya and ended up dead the next day. And so you started to, like, the constrictions on media really started to kick in. And where, Putin really started to latch onto power is in 2004. A group of Chechens go in southern Russia, invade a primary school, take it hostage. They put everybody into the gym, as you see in that top picture. They basically strung explosives all across that gym, and the Russians tried to bum rush the terrorists, and the terrorists blow up the gym, killed over 300 people, including 186 children. There was huge outrage initially at the Russian military for doing it, but Putin turned it around and just said, no, this is about that we are, at a war with a terrorist group, and we are going to take power, and I'm going to make sure we're going to protect us. So instead of governors of different regions being voted in, he got laws passed that allowed for the president to actually appoint the governors of each of those regions. Non-governmental organizations, nope, we're gonna limit them so they can't really be active. FSB, you're gonna now have a much greater power to go out there and stop terrorism or opposition against the government. Media, super restricted. You started to be limited on even being able to report what the government was doing in terms of transparency at all. And essentially, he said, we showed ourselves to be weak, and the weak get beaten, and that's not going to happen anymore. And it worked. He was able to turn public perception on its head. In the United States, he was seen as a guy that was, okay, remember, this was like 3 years after 9/11. So the United States had a lot of support for, oh, Islamic terrorists over there, they're Chechens, take them down. Like, we got our own war on terror too. We're kind of standing together. It wasn't seen like as like people on the inside were seeing it like a little bit like, oh, this guy's doing things that aren't really democratic, but it's against terrorism, so it must be okay. Okay. So this is why when Russians generally are distrusting of government, even though they look to make sure that the state needs to provide those important services to protect us and make sure things are done. Okay, they don't, because in the past the government has been brutal, but we do need that strong hand. And so what you get though is you don't get like massive opposition in society. You get a weak civil society, an apathetic group. Now, this word, this term, civil society, it is the most misused term in all of comparative government. There is always an FRQ that has civil society involved somewhere, and it is the most missed question. Civil society is you must say this whenever you see civil society on any paper: a group of people that is not a part of the government that has a political agenda, whether it's a neighborhood group that wants better streets, whether it's the Sierra Club that wants environmentalism, whether it's the AARP that's lobbying for senior citizens. It could be a small, tiny group. It could be a huge group. Civil society is a group of people, not a part of the government, that talks politics. And in Russia, civil society really is not existent. And part of the reason is because from their youth, young people are taught to love Russia and therefore love Vladimir Putin. So, like Walking Together, Nashi, the Young Guard of United Russia, and more currently, the Young Army Cadets National Movement, all of them very much into pro Putin, pro Putin, pro Putin, pro Putin, pro Putin, like the Hitler Youth, basically. And minors are not even allowed to really congregate in organizations anymore, as it is against the law. And so you start seeing a lot of propaganda that is very, very much pro Putin and pro Russia.